I married the down-and-out childhood sweetheart my elder sister refused to wed. Since our wedding day, I'd thrown myself into running the household, treating him with nothing but respect and decorum. When Ling Yang topped the imperial examinations and became the #1 scholar, everyone congratulated me, saying my days of hardship were finally over. Yet word soon spread that he was sending heavy betrothal gifts to ask for my elder sister's hand in marriage as his secondary wife. Equal in status to me, the entire town was buzzing with his words. Miss Su the elder is bright and noble, worthy of all the love in the world. Now that I, Ling, have achieved success in the imperial exams, I'll never let her suffer another day of hardship. They were a match made in heaven, talented scholar and beautiful lady. I, on the other hand, was just meant to endure suffering. That very night, I, the humble wife who'd shared his poverty, packed my bags to make room for my elder sister. I left my hometown far behind, vanishing without a trace. The newly crowned #1 scholar of the dynasty went mad searching for his wife. Finally tracking me down in a tiny, remote corner of the world, I stared at Ling Yang, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion, and asked in confusion, "Why are you looking for me? We never had any feelings for each other, did we?" He fixed his gaze on me, tears spilling from his eyes, but then he let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "You mean to say, you don't love me?" Ling Yang and my elder sister had been betrothed since childhood, inseparable playmates who shared an innocent affection. But half a month before their wedding day, disaster struck the Ling family. Their entire fortune was seized by the imperial court, only thanks to Ling Yang's aunt, a concubine in the palace, who pleaded for mercy. Did the emperor spare the lives of the Ling clan? My elder sister visited the thatched cottage where the Ling family now lived. When she returned home, she threw a tantrum, refusing to eat or drink, and vowed she would never marry into the Ling family. No one in the Su household dared even mention the surname Ling in her presence. My parents doted on their precious eldest daughter, so their eyes turned to me. My elder sister was bright and proud. A single glance from her could make countless people scramble to bring her whatever she desired. As for me, I was merely the product of my father's drunken mistake. I was never supposed to be born. It was only out of pity for an unborn life that my stepmother allowed me and my birth mother to live in a small, secluded courtyard on the outskirts of the Su mansion. After my elder sister went on her hunger strike for a full day, my father stepped into our humble courtyard for the first time in my life. He didn't come to negotiate, he came to issue an order. Since you are a daughter of the Su family, you must do your duty for the family. My stepmother took my hand in hers. She couldn't bear to see her own daughter suffer, so she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Sure, mother has always cared for you. Now, please help mother." And just like that, I was hastily pushed into a wedding sedan chair. In that shabby thatched cottage, my wedding veil was lifted. The oil lamp flickered, casting uncertain shadows on Ling Yang's face, making it impossible to read his expression. The woman he loved was my elder sister. But the woman whose veil he lifted was me. After a long, tense silence, I heard him let out a soft sigh. "It's late, let's rest." Ling Yang never asked why it was me who'd married him instead of my elder sister. He never uttered a single word about my elder sister at all. It was as if he already knew everything. By day, he taught at the village school. By night, he burned the midnight oil, poring over his books. Ling Yang's mother spent her days weeping, lamenting how her son's talent was being wasted in such a miserable place. Every time, Ling Yang would calm her down with his steady, reassuring words. Ling Yang's father traveled with a merchant caravan, sending back small sums of silver whenever he could. We weren't exactly destitute, but we weren't well off either. Every coin had to be stretched thin. Before I married Ling Yang, my father had warned me to curry favor with the Ling family. He knew Ling Yang was no ordinary man. Sooner or later, he would rise to greatness. The Su family couldn't afford to make an enemy of him. If I did well, my birth mother's life in the Su mansion would be easier. Ling Yang's mother had never lifted a finger to do housework or cook a meal, so all the household chores fell to me, but she didn't like me. She was always saying how if my elder sister had married Ling Yang instead, the household would be running smoothly, and Ling Yang wouldn't be so quiet and withdrawn. It wasn't that I didn't want to make Ling Yang happy, but he was a man of great learning, steeped in poetry and philosophy. All I ever thought about was what to cook for dinner, or how to get rid of the pests in the vegetable patch. We simply had nothing in common. If my elder sister had been the one to marry him, they could have discussed poetry and literature together. They would have had so much to talk about, but I couldn't do that, ever since I was born. Confined to that tiny corner of the Su mansion, my only concern had been surviving another day, scrounging for food under the watchful, cruel eyes of the mansion's servants. They yearned for a soulmate, someone who shared their ideals and passions. I yearned simply to live. Every time Ling Yang's mother nitpicked at me, I let her words go in one ear and out the other. As long as it didn't threaten my survival, it didn't matter. Ling Yang mostly ignored these squabbles. Only when his mother's words became too harsh would he put down his chopsticks with a sharp click, and just like that, the room would fall silent. I knew my place. Ling Yang wasn't sticking up for me out of any affection. He was just tired of his mother's nagging ruining his meal. He was always cold and distant toward me, never getting too close. The only time I'd ever seen him smile was when he was with my elder sister. It was a smile that could melt ice and snow, outshining everything around him. But to me, that smile wasn't worth a single steamed bun, 2 for a penny. He gave me his monthly salary from the village school to buy food for the household. At first, I thought it was for me, but then I found out it was actually for his mother. After she'd spent a whole tael of silver on a bolt of cloth, Ling Yang started giving me the money to manage instead. Naturally, this earned me even more of his mother's cold stares and petty resentments. I just treated her like a noisy frog croaking by the pond, annoying, but harmless. Ling Yang wasn't picky about his food. He was easy to please, eating whatever I put in front of him without a single complaint. All things considered, my life was fairly peaceful. I had enough to eat and wear, and occasionally, I would receive letters from my birth mother. She couldn't read or write, so I knew my father must have hired someone to write them for her. I couldn't read either, so every time I got a letter, I would rush to Ling Yang with hope in my heart. He would put down his book for a moment, take the letter from me, and read it aloud in his clear, melodious voice. Sure, mother is doing well at home. The servant Mrs. Wang has been transferred by the master. Now he suddenly stopped reading. I urged him to continue. Craning my neck to look at the letter even though I couldn't understand a single character, he froze for a moment, then subtly pulled the letter away from me. Now I have enough to eat and wear at home. The mistress even made me new clothes and gave me charcoal for the winter. The old illness that's plagued me for years is finally being treated by a doctor. This winter won't be so hard to bear. Sure, how are you? The master says your husband is a talented young man who will surely achieve great things in the future. You must stay by his side and live a good life. His eyes were lowered, his gaze seeming to linger on my chapped, frostbitten fingers. I raised my hand to wipe away my tears, swallowing down the lump in my throat. Ling Yang, can you help me write a reply? Are you not doing well here? We spoke at the exact same time. I nodded, he nodded too. It was clear his question had been nothing more than a casual remark. He picked up his brush, looked up at me, and said, "What do you want to say?" I sniffled, my voice thick with tears. "Just tell her I'm doing well. I have enough to eat and warm clothes to wear. Tell her to take good care of herself." He thought for a moment, then dipped his brush in ink and began to write, filling page after page. Once the ink was dry, he folded the letter and put it in an envelope, handing it to me. I clutched the letter tightly in my hands and thanked him. Ling Yang and I were husband and wife in name only. I never dared to hope for his affection. Apparently, my lack of expectation pleased him. That night, after I finished washing up and returned to my room, I found a small jar of ointment on my bedside table. When I applied it to my hands, the burning pain of my cracked skin eased a little. The next day, Ling Yang's mother found the ointment and confiscated it. Yelling at me for being wasteful and selfish, she tried to twist my arm in anger, but I dodged her easily. "Ling Yang gave this to me," I said calmly. Her anger flared even hotter. "You're lying through your teeth. Why would my Yanga buy something for you? Do you think you're even half as good as your sister? You don't deserve it." I gave it to her. Ling Yang had come home earlier than usual that day. He walked in, set his books down, and said those words in his usual calm, unemotional tone. And just like that, Ling Yang's mother's anger was extinguished, as if doused with cold water. I took the ointment back from her and followed Ling Yang into his room. He paused midway through unbuttoning his robe, frowning at me, a hint of annoyance in his eyes. "You can keep it, no need to thank me." I waved my hand dismissively. I slaved away day and night for this family. This ointment was the least I deserved. Why on earth would I thank him for it? I actually wanted to ask. "Can you teach me how to read?" I was tired of him reading all my private letters from my mother. It was embarrassing. He fell silent for a long time. My hope began to fade, and I lowered my eyes in disappointment. "Never mind. Mr. Lee from the village sometimes reads aloud by the village entrance. I can ask him instead." Ling Yang rummaged through his book chest and pulled out a book, handing it to me. "Every night after dinner, you can study with me for half an hour." I was overjoyed, clutching the book tightly to my chest as I hurried out of the room. Why seek help elsewhere when I had a scholar right here in the house? I couldn't understand a single word in this book now, but I was determined to read it cover to cover someday, thanks to those half-hour study sessions every night. Ling Yang and I grew a little closer. I didn't think much of it, and Ling Yang continued to treat me with his usual cold indifference, but his mother couldn't stand it. She was terrified I would steal her son away from her. She even banned me from cooking, insisting on taking over the kitchen herself to show Ling Yang her motherly love. I was more than happy to have the extra free time. Unfortunately, his mother was a terrible cook. She made a pot of wild vegetable soup that was barely edible, and she didn't even share it with me. By midnight, both she and Ling Yang were foaming at the mouth, writhing in pain. I rushed to fetch the village doctor, dragging him to our cottage in the middle of the night. We spent the entire night inducing vomiting and purging their systems until finally, their breathing stabilized. Only then did I let out a long, relieved breath. Ling Yang's mother was fast asleep, so I sat by Ling Yang's bedside, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. Every few minutes, I would hold my finger under his nose to check if he was still breathing, murmuring worriedly, "You can't die. Please don't die." Ling Yang seemed to hear me. His eyebrows twitched slightly, and his lips parted as if he was trying to speak. I leaned in close to listen. "Yuyan." His breath brushed against my ear. I touched my earlobe, then sat back down. If he was dreaming about my elder sister, then he must be getting better. I rested my head on the edge of his bed, too exhausted to keep my eyes open any longer, and drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, my neck was stiff and sore, and I could barely move it. I rubbed my neck and opened my eyes. My gaze automatically drifted to Ling Yang's bed, and there I was staring straight into his deep, dark eyes. He'd been watching me for who knew how long, his expression unreadable. I reached out to feel his forehead, letting out a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness. Your fever is gone. How do you feel now?" His face was pale and gaunt, but it only added to his elegant, fragile charm. "You stayed by my side all night?" he asked. I nodded. It was such an obvious question. Had the poison addled his brain? I looked at him in alarm, cupping his face in my hands and panicking. "Are you really okay? Does your head hurt? Have you forgotten anything?" His brain couldn't afford to be damaged. He was supposed to rise to greatness, to help me get my mother out of the Sioux mansion. If his brain was broken, it would be no different from him being dead. He exhaled softly, wrapping his hand around mine and gently pulling it away from his face. his voice low and hoarse. "I'm fine, don't worry." I let out a huge sigh of relief, my body going limp with exhaustion, and forgot to pull my hand back from his grasp. "Good, that's good. I'm so glad you're okay." He pressed his lips together, his gaze lingering on me, his expression suddenly becoming complicated and hard to read. I had no interest in guessing what was going on inside the mind of a man as clever as him. I pulled my hand away. He seemed to grasp at empty air for a split second before letting his hand drop limply onto the bed. I rubbed my stiff neck, gritting my teeth as I rolled it to loosen the kinks. "I'll go ask Mr. to cover your classes at the school for a few days. You just focus on resting and getting better. Don't worry about anything else." His eyebrows twitched slightly, and the rare vulnerability faded from his gaunt face, replaced by his usual cold indifference. "You're on familiar terms with Mr. I shot him a strange look, checking once again if the poison had addled his brain. "There are only 2 teachers at the village school. If you're bedridden, who else is going to take over your classes besides him?" I patted him on the shoulder. I felt his body stiffen beneath my touch, and remembering how much he hated physical contact with me, I quickly pulled my hand back. "If you feel bad about it, just pay him for the days he substitutes for you." I moved his book chest to the side of his bed, making it easier for him to reach his books. "If you get bored, you can read." He glanced at the book chest, then his eyes drifted back to me, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Thank you, Yushu." I froze for a moment. It was the first time he'd ever called me by my name. I curved my lips into a small smile, my eyes crinkling with amusement. "It's the least I can do." He stared at me, his gaze unfocused, as if he was in a daze. My mood lifted as I turned and walked out of the room. Since he wasn't dead yet, he might as well study until he dropped. Ling Yang's mother was also bedridden, looking pale and weak. For once, she was quiet and well-behaved for several days. It was as if she'd finally accepted the truth that she was no longer the pampered Mrs. Ling, waited on hand and foot by servants, that she would never have Su Yuyen, that perfect, elegant daughter-in-law she'd always dreamed of. She was just a peasant woman who couldn't even cook a decent meal, who'd nearly killed herself and her son with her own incompetence. The light in her eyes dimmed, extinguished completely. I was secretly pleased. At last, she'd stopped making trouble. With Ling Yang recovering from his illness in his room, it was even more convenient for me to ask him to teach me how to read, but with 2 sick people to take care of, I was left to run the entire household alone. My waist ached so badly it felt like it was going to snap in half. I looked up at Ling Yang's profile as he buried himself in his books. I thought to myself that he was indeed handsome, then forced myself to perk up again. With this kind of dedication, how could he not top the imperial examinations? His fingers tightened slightly around the book, his long eyelashes fluttering gently against his cheek, but he didn't look up from his reading. He asked in a low voice, "Why are you staring at me?" I snapped back to my senses, realizing I'd been gawking at him for quite some time. I touched my nose awkwardly, then brushed a hand casually over his hair. "There was something in your hair." Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed my wrist, his dark, obsidian eyes locked onto mine, his gaze so intense it sent my heart fluttering with a strange, unfamiliar panic. "I already got it out," I stammered. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. But his expression remained mostly unchanged. "Thank you, Yushu." I forced a smile, yanking my wrist out of his grasp. Ling Yang's mother had finally quieted down, but Ling Yang himself had become strange. He'd always kept a distance of at least 3 steps between us before. Now that he'd recovered, he actually started standing close to me, even trying to help out when I was doing chores around the house. But it was clear he'd spent his whole life as a pampered young master. He was clumsy and awkward, more of a hindrance than a help. I had to carefully choose my words to send him away without hurting his feelings. Sometimes, when he came home from the school, He would bring me little gifts, hair ribbons or lip balm bought from the traveling peddler. I rested my chin on my hand, staring at the things he'd bought me, my eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Had he suddenly changed his personality? The window was blown open by the howling wind and snow. I got up to close it. Then remembered that Ling Yang had gone to the school without an umbrella. I grabbed 2 umbrellas, propped one open over my head, and stepped out into the snow, my boots sinking into the thick white blanket with every step. The bitter wind turned my hands bright red with cold. No one had expected such a heavy snowstorm to hit out of nowhere. I stood at the school gate, tucking one umbrella under my arm and blowing warm breath onto my freezing hands. My clothes weren't warm enough. I was bundled up like a rice dumpling, but the cold wind still seeped through the fabric, cutting to the bone. Fortunately, I didn't have to wait long. One by one, the students filed out of the school building. Ling Yang was the last to come out, standing tall and straight in the swirling snow, his features as clear and elegant as a painting. His eyes widened slightly in surprise when he saw me. I hunched my shoulders against the cold and walked over to him, holding out the umbrella. I couldn't let this golden goose catch a cold. My mother's future and mine depended entirely on him. His lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. Taking the umbrella from my hand, his fingers brushed against mine, sending a faint shiver up my arm. "Don't come all the way here to bring me an umbrella next time," he said quietly. I nodded, already used to his cold, detached tone. Then I turned and saw Mr. Li, also huddled against the cold. His face pale and his nose bright red from the freezing wind. I couldn't help but chuckle. Now that's what a normal person looks like when they're freezing. Mr. Li's health was poor. I'd heard that he spent all his meager salary from the school on books, never buying medicine for himself even when he was ill. I hesitated for a moment, then held out the other umbrella to him. He stared at me in surprise. "You're a woman, and you're weaker than I am. You should keep it for yourself." I pressed the umbrella handle into his hands firmly. "Your home is farther away. You need it more than I do." He tried to refuse again, but his eyes flicked past me to Ling Yang, who stood behind me holding an umbrella. Finally, he accepted the umbrella with a nod. "I'll return it and thank you properly another day." Mr. Li was a gentle-spoken man. The children at the school weren't the least bit afraid of him. He opened the umbrella and walked away into the snow. I turned back to look at Ling Yang. There was still plenty of space under his umbrella for 2 people. He stood there without moving. I hesitated for a moment, then decided not to impose. "Let's go home early. The road will be hard to walk on once it gets dark." I turned and started walking, the wind whipping my hair into a messy tangle. I brushed the strands out of my eyes. Suddenly, the collar of my coat tightened, and I stumbled backward. My back hit a firm, warm chest. Ling Yang leaned down, his dark eyes fixed on me, his expression unreadable. "You're surprisingly generous, giving your umbrella to anyone who asks." He'd pulled me under his umbrella. I steadied myself, stepping back a little to put some distance between us. "It's not a gift, it's a loan," I said defensively. "We only have 2 umbrellas at home. I can't just give them away like that." I thought I heard him let out a soft, amused huff. I rubbed my ears, which were numb with cold, and walked beside him slowly, making my way home. The snow-covered path was slippery, so we had to be careful with every step. Before I knew it, his hand was resting steadily on my arm, supporting me as we walked, side by side. We trudged through the ice and snow, our steps in sync. For a moment, it really felt like we were facing the hardships of life together. The absurdity of the thought made me want to laugh. I glanced over at Ling Yang. His profile looked unexpectedly soft in the falling snow. Winter turned to spring, and the relationship between Ling Yang and me began to thaw. Just like the frozen river outside our cottage, we were no longer just strangers sharing a roof. I was perfectly satisfied with this state of affairs. When he achieved great success in the future, it would be easy to ask him to help get my mother out of the Sioux mansion. Shortly before the imperial examinations, a visitor arrived at our humble home, exquisitely embroidered silk shoes, a luxurious dress made of the finest fabric, a radiant beauty. She looked completely out of place in our shabby, grey cottage. My elder sister couldn't hide her disgust at the sight of our home. When she saw me, dressed in rags and covered in dust, a flicker of relief and disdain crossed her eyes. Then she turned to Ling Yang's mother, who had once doted on her so much. She took the older woman's hands in hers, her voice sweet as honey. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come to visit you earlier, Auntie. I fell ill not long ago, and I've only just recovered. How have you been these past few years?" Ling Yang's mother looked flattered and overwhelmed, tears of grievance welling up in her eyes as she poured out all her hardships over the years. Su Yuyan listened half-heartedly, her eyes darting constantly toward the door. Ling Yang wouldn't be home for another half an hour. She turned to me, her tone imperious. "Go fetch Ling Yang. Tell him I'm here to see him." Ling Yang's mother also waved her hand, urging me to hurry. I lowered my eyes and walked out of the room, my expression numb. She was father's daughter, so was I, yet from the moment we were born, our lives had been worlds apart. How could I not feel jealous? But the human heart is biased. If it wasn't inclined toward me, there was nothing I could do to change it. I'd accepted that truth a long time ago. Ling Yang looked up when he saw me, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" He raised his hand, as if to feel my forehead, checking if I was ill. I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "Someone's here to see you. I'm not finished with class yet." I stared at him, my voice flat. "You'll want to see her." She was the woman he'd longed for day and night, the name he'd moaned in his sleep when he was delirious from the poison. In our shabby little courtyard, their eyes met, instantly. Su Yuyan's eyes filled with tears. Ling Yang's body went rigid, his voice cold and stiff, devoid of any emotion. "What are you doing here?" Su Yuyan was taken aback by his icy tone. Tears spilled down her cheeks, making her look even more delicate and pitiful. Ling Yang's mother shot her son a sharp glare. "How dare you speak to Yuyan like that?" Su Yuyan walked toward Ling Yang, sniffling as she explained. "Ling Yang, I was really ill back then. Father and mother were so worried about me, they were afraid I wouldn't survive the hardships of living here. It wasn't that I didn't want to marry you." Her magnificent carriage had already attracted a crowd of curious villagers. Their eyes peered over the bamboo fence, all fixed on the scene unfolding in our courtyard. Ling Yang's mother pulled Su Yuyan into the house, then shot her son a meaningful look. "Go inside and talk to her privately." Ling Yang's expression flickered with emotion for a moment, then he nodded and walked into the house. Clearly, the bond between childhood sweethearts hadn't been broken by their years apart. I sat in the courtyard, sorting through a basket of beans. Ling Yang's mother stood guard at the door, as if afraid I would go inside and interrupt their reunion. But our shabby little cottage had paper-thin walls. I could hear Su Yuyan's soft sobs clearly. A beautiful woman crying was enough to melt any man's heart. She explained how she'd been too ill to marry him, how she'd been afraid of being a burden to him. Now that she was healthy again, she only wished him success in his future career. She didn't ask for anything more. There was a long silence inside the house. Then Su Yuyan walked out, her eyes still red from crying, but a faint smile playing on her lips. She came over to me, holding out a letter. "This is from Aunt Lin, don't worry. Little sister, she's living peacefully in the Su mansion, and she's doing well." I took the letter from her. She leaned down, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered, "You and Ling Yang have never shared a bed, have you?" My body stiffened completely. It was a question, but her tone was filled with absolute certainty. She let out a soft, mocking laugh. "He's always been such a picky man. He even has specific requirements for his ink, brushes, paper, and inkstone. Do you really think someone like him would settle for just anyone in his bed? Not everything is good enough for his eyes." I lowered my head, dropping a bean into the basket, and bit back a retort. "You have no idea, sister, A man can afford to be picky when he's not in dire straits, but when there's no other choice, even someone like Ling Yang, who can bend and adapt to survive, will take what he can get. But now wasn't the time for petty arguments. My mother was still in their clutches. I couldn't risk saying something that would put her in danger. Su Yuyen reached out and straightened the collar of my coat, her fingers cold against my skin. Your collar was crooked, little sister. I fixed it for you. Next time, remember to check your appearance in a mirror before you go out. It's not proper to let others see you looking such a mess. I nodded obediently. I will, sister. She smiled and patted my cheek gently, then turned to bid Ling Yang's mother farewell. Ling Yang stayed inside the house the entire time, never coming out to see Su Yuan off. I glanced through the window. In his hand was a delicate silk sachet I'd never seen before. The sachet was as beautiful, elegant, and luxurious as Su Yuan herself. It looked like something that should never be touched by the dust and grime of our humble life. He stared down at the sachet, his expression unreadable. I went back to my room and tied the cloth sachet I'd made around my waist. It was just a rough piece of fabric filled with dried medicinal herbs, plain and unadorned, not at all pretty. It was good enough for my own use. I had no intention of ever giving it to Ling Yang now. He'd been raised in luxury all his life. He could easily tell the difference between something cheap and something valuable, when a man's down on his luck. He can't afford to be picky, but now that he has a choice, I won't cling to him like a fool. It would only be humiliating. Besides, Su Yuyen had swallowed her disgust and come all the way to this backwater village, warning me subtly to know my place and stay out of her way. That alone made it clear. Ling Yang had only been down on his luck temporarily. The imperial examinations were fast approaching. His chance to turn his fate around was almost here, yet as the day drew nearer, I grew more and more restless. Mr. Li had resigned from the village school to focus entirely on his studies for the exams. Ling Yang was swamped with work. Dark circles formed under his eyes, growing darker with each passing day. He was the only teacher left at the school, responsible for all the students. The work was exhausting, both mentally and physically. I suggested to him, why not put the school on hold for a while? Focus on your own studies. He pressed his fingers to his temples and shook his head, his voice weary. Father hasn't sent a letter in months. Ling Yang's father was still traveling with the merchant caravan. No letters, no silver. The family's only source of income was Ling Yang's meager salary from the school. Would manage to save a little, but not nearly enough. I sighed inwardly. Su Yuyen, if you were going to come all this way, you could have at least left us some money. A silk sachet can't be eaten or drunk. Love is supposed to keep you fed, isn't it? Well, let Ling Yang starve on his childhood sweetheart's affection then. My face must have looked miserable, because Ling Yang softened his tone, saying gently, it's all right. I bit my lip, staring at him. You're working yourself ragged. You can't study properly when you're this tired. You'll wear yourself out. Hundreds of scholars had spent years poring over their books, grinding their way through endless nights of study, all eager to prove themselves at the imperial examinations. Ling Yang had countless rivals. If he fell ill, or if he wasn't fully prepared, it wouldn't be impossible for him to fail. My worry was written all over my face. A faint smile tugged at his lips. He reached out, brushing a strand of stray hair away from my face. I froze, my body going rigid with surprise. I took an instinctive step back. He lowered his hand, his expression calm, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He looked so unperturbed that I felt silly for overreacting to his small gesture. You should rest, I said quickly. I'll go check if there's anything else that needs to be done. Ever since our wedding day, he'd slept in his study. His excuse back then had been that he studied late into the night, and he didn't want to disturb me. No one had objected to this arrangement. He wanted peace and quiet. I had no interest in sharing a bed with him anyway. Ling Yang's mother was counting on him to top the examinations so he could marry a daughter from a noble family. We all had our own agendas. I left the study and stayed up late mending some clothes. A needle pricked my finger, and a bead of blood welled up. I popped my finger into my mouth, sucking on it gently. The faint sting helped clear my scattered thoughts. All the letters I'd sent to the Sioux mansion asking for money had vanished without a trace. I didn't understand why father was so eager to curry favor with Ling Yang, yet refused to spare even a little money to help us through this tough time. I set the mending aside and rummaged through my dowry. When I'd married Ling Yang, the Sioux family had given me a few things. I'd originally planned to keep them safe, to use the money to open a small shop for my mother once I managed to get her out of the Sioux mansion. But first, I had to get her out. And Ling Yang needed to be well rested and focused for the examinations. The next day, I pawned a jade bracelet from my dowry and got 20 taels of silver in return. It would be enough to tide us over for a long time. When Ling Yang took the money bag from me, he didn't look grateful at all. Instead, his eyes darkened, his expression unreadable. "Now we have money," I said firmly. "You stay home and study in peace. Let the village head worry about the school." He tightened his grip on the money bag, his gaze locking onto mine, deep and intense. He didn't ask where the money had come from, he just nodded slightly. He threw himself into his studies. I cooked nourishing soups and tonics for him every day, changing the menu to keep things interesting. Even Ling Yang's mother stopped nitpicking at me so much. She rarely found fault with me anymore. Shortly before the examinations were to begin, someone arrived from the Sioux mansion, father himself. He'd probably thought his arrival would be like a godsend, saving us from disaster. He'd never expected to find Ling Yang still standing tall and proud, his dignity intact. Our situation wasn't nearly as desperate as I'd described in my letters. In fact, Ling Yang refused to accept the money father offered him. Father looked at me with a scrutinizing, displeased gaze. I thought to myself, "You old fox, always playing your little mind games. If you'd waited until the last minute to play your savior card, Ling Yang would have been half dead by then." Before he left, he asked to speak to me alone. I climbed into his carriage. The interior was spotlessly clean, and my boots left dusty footprints on the floor the moment I stepped inside. "How has Ling Yang been treating you?" he asked. I kept my head down, answering quietly, "He's been good to me." There was a long silence. I snuck a glance up at him. His eyes were deep and unfathomable. I couldn't tell if he was satisfied with my answer or not. "But he's never touched me," I added softly. "I suppose his heart still belongs to elder sister." He waved a hand dismissively, telling me to get out of the carriage. By the time I stepped out, my back was soaked with cold sweat. At least he hadn't scolded me. That meant I'd done a decent job of playing my part. I let out a sigh of relief. But the day after father left, rumors started spreading through the village. I became the subject of vicious gossip. People said I'd carried on secret trysts with men before my marriage, even going so far as to name the side gate of the Sioux mansion where I'd supposedly met my lovers. My reputation was completely ruined. I knew without a doubt that these rumors had been spread on father's orders. He wanted to control me, to threaten me, to show me that he could crush me like an ant whenever he pleased. Ling Yang never mentioned the rumors. He kept his head down, focusing solely on his studies, or perhaps he simply didn't care. But some busybody aunties came to our house to stir up trouble with Ling Yang's mother. I stirred the firewood in the stove absent-mindedly, cooking dinner. By the time the meal was ready, one of the aunties was still there, lingering to watch the show. Ling Yang's mother looked at me with a sharp, disapproving glare. She fixed her cold eyes on me, demanding, "What's all this nonsense about the rumors going around the village?" The busybody auntie chimed in, fanning the flames. "Yes, dear, if there's a misunderstanding, you should clear it up right away. All this gossip is terrible for your reputation." I sighed heavily. The worst part was, the rumors weren't entirely false. But my trysts had only been deals with the servants to buy necessities. The maids in the inner courtyard of the Sioux mansion had stolen everything I'd bought. never letting any of it reach us. A half-truth was the hardest thing to refute. I began. Ling Yang's dark, piercing gaze shot toward the busybody auntie. His voice was cold and sharp as ice. She is my legally wedded wife. I know exactly what kind of person she is. She doesn't need to prove her innocence to anyone, and certainly not to you. The auntie's face turned red and then white with embarrassment. She mumbled defensively, I was only trying to help. What if you're being fooled? Ling Yang shifted slightly, stepping aside to reveal the door. His tone was final. You may leave now. The auntie stormed out, her face black with anger, muttering about how ungrateful we were. I stared at Ling Yang, stunned, my mind going blank for a moment. If you have nothing better to do, mother, Ling Yang said, turning to his mother, his voice still cold, you should rest and take care of your health. Don't listen to idle gossip and jump to conclusions. Ling Yang's mother's face also turned an ugly shade of red. Then Ling Yang looked at me. I blinked. My turn. Actually, I started to explain. Eat, he said simply. Oh, I replied, falling silent. Wasn't he even going to ask me about it? After dinner, I followed him into his study. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't say a word. So I spoke first. I did make deals with people, but it was only to ask the servants in the outer courtyard to buy things for me. The maids in the inner courtyard stole everything, none of it ever made it to us. He sat down, picking up a book from his desk. No need to explain. I leaned forward, resting my hands on his desk, and asked tentatively, you trust me that much? His eyes flicked down to my hands. They were resting on his rice paper. I quickly pulled them back. He let out a low, unexpected chuckle. When a wall is about to collapse, everyone rushes to push it over, he said, his voice cold and cynical. So many people claim to stand for justice, but how many of them actually care about the truth? They're just bored fools looking for entertainment. His expression was icy cold as he spoke, but when his gaze landed on me, it seemed to soften, just a little. I couldn't read the look in his eyes. The village buzzed with gossip, but the Ling household was quiet, like an oasis separated from the rest of the world. I packed Ling Yang's luggage for him, then saw him off early one morning as he left for the capital to take the examinations. Before he climbed into the carriage, he leaned down and whispered to me, "Thank you for holding down the fort while I'm gone." I nodded. "Wait for me to come back," he said. Could I really wait for him to return? In my moment of hesitation, I felt a soft, warm touch on my forehead. It was like a gentle breeze brushing against the strings of a guzheng, sending a faint, trembling vibration through my heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of a future worth looking forward to. The imperial examinations consisted of 3 rounds. Ling Yang's mother prayed to every god and Buddha she could think of day and night. Strangely enough, at this critical juncture, I wasn't as nervous as I'd been before. Every day, after finishing my chores, I'd sneak into Ling Yang's study and read his books. I could recognize the characters now, but I didn't understand their meaning. I marked all the parts one didn't get with paper slips, planning to ask Ling Yang when he came back. Ling Yang didn't return home after the examinations ended. He sent a letter saying he would stay in the capital to wait for the results. The list of successful candidates wouldn't be posted for another half a month. I counted down the days, growing more and more eager with each passing day. I wasn't just waiting to hear if Ling Yang had passed the examinations. There was something else, something I couldn't quite name. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling that filled my heart, keeping me awake at night, making me return to Ling Yang's study again and again to read his books. Before Ling Yang could come home, the imperial messengers arrived first to announce the good news. The emperor himself had selected him as the #1 scholar, an honor beyond compare. Ling Yang's mother was overjoyed, immediately planning a grand feast to celebrate. I suppressed my own excitement, waiting patiently for Ling Yang to come home, but instead of seeing him, I heard another piece of news. He had sent a formal proposal to the Su mansion. Miss Su the elder is bright and noble, worthy of all the love in the world. His words echoed through the streets and alleys, spoken by everyone. Now that I, Ling, have achieved success in the imperial examinations, I'll never let her suffer another day of hardship. Everyone knew those words. They spread like wildfire. The envious glances that had been directed at me before were now filled with pity. That's the new #1 scholar's first wife, the one who's going to be cast aside. Not cast aside, he's going to take her elder sister as his secondary wife, equal in status. I heard they were childhood sweethearts. I felt neither surprised nor angry, only a faint sense of disorientation. Luckily, I hadn't allowed myself to fall in love with Ling Yang. The small flicker of affection that had grown between us after sharing so many hardships together only made my heart ache for a moment. When the servants from the Su mansion came to take me away, I didn't hesitate for a second. He was the new #1 scholar, with a bright future ahead of him. I knew it was time for me to take my leave. When Ling Yang returned home in triumph, he was greeted only by his overjoyed mother. The books in his study showed signs of being read frequently. Everything in the house was exactly as he'd left it, but his first wife, the woman who'd endured hardship with him, who'd supported him through thick and thin, was gone without a trace. The one who came to see me was my stepmother. I also saw my birth mother. She looked well. "You've done well, Shua," my stepmother said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Not only does Ling Yang not bear any ill will toward the Su family, but his heart still belongs to Yuyan. She lifted the lid of a tray she was holding. The tray was filled with rows of silver ingots. "But you know how spoiled Yuyan has been since she was a child," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "She could never bear to share her husband with another woman. You understand, don't you?" My eyes swept over the silver ingots. I tightened my grip on my mother's hand and said quietly, "I know my place." My stepmother's smile widened. She gestured for the maid to hand me the tray. "I've always known you were an obedient girl," she said. "I've arranged new identities for you and your mother. You can go live somewhere nice, start a new life. But this capital city, you must never come back." I took the 2 new identity papers from her. The names written on them were completely unfamiliar. My stepmother blew on her cup of hot tea, her eyes lowering as the smile faded from her face. Her voice was cold and threatening. "You know I'm a devout Buddhist, but your father is not. If I hadn't stepped in to settle this matter for you, the next time you saw him, things would not have ended so peacefully. Then the next time I saw him, I'd be meeting the king of hell himself." I didn't care about her threats. Being able to leave this place and live somewhere else with my mother was already the best outcome I could have hoped for. A man as ruthless as Su Ting wouldn't hesitate to kill his own daughter. Eliminating the root of the problem was his way of doing things. Only my stepmother could hold him back, if even just a little. Su Ting killed, his wife saved. What a bizarre pair they made. "Rest assured, Mrs. Su," I said calmly, "I have no desire for the glories of the capital. I only wish to spend the rest of my days in peace with my mother. I have no other ambitions." She was clearly satisfied with my obedience. She ordered her servants to send my mother and me away. I suppressed the vague, tangled emotions in my heart and boarded a ship sailing south with my mother. As the river breeze ruffled my hair, my heart felt light and free. A smile spread across my face. The vast sea allows fish to leap. The boundless sky lets birds fly. This was the poem Ling Yang had taught me. Now, I finally understood its meaning. The messy entanglements of the Ling and Su families had nothing to do with me anymore. Let them think I'd vanished into thin air. The Su family would surely come up with some suitable excuse. Most likely, they'd pin a few more crimes on me, claim I'd run off with my lover, or something equally scandalous. They were experts at twisting the truth. As for Ling Yang, he was riding high on his success, with the woman he loved by his side. I doubted he had any time to spare thinking about his plain, homely ex-wife. The climate in Jiangnan was mild and pleasant, and the people were simple and honest. even the local dialect. Soft and melodious, sounded beautiful even when someone was scolding you. I exchanged all the remaining items from my dowry for silver notes, then used the money to open an embroidery shop for my mother in a small town. Her embroidery style was completely different from the local ones, and her work quickly became highly sought after. Wealthy merchants and noble families from all over the region came to place orders for her pieces. The small courtyard where we'd initially settled soon expanded into a proper mansion. We hired guards and maids, and no longer had to lift a finger to do any manual labor. My rough, calloused hands gradually became smooth and fair with daily care. My back, which had been strained from years of hard work, finally healed, no longer aching with every move. When my mother had nothing to do, she loved to stare at me, reaching out to stroke my face and murmur, "My Shua is so beautiful. You were just worn down by hardship before," looking as scrawny as a little monkey. I looked at my reflection in the bronze mirror. My complexion was glowing, fair with a healthy pink flush. The person I used to be would not have recognized herself now. I was perfectly content with my current life. I never once asked about how the people from my past were faring. Jiangnan nurtured beauty, and the men here were handsome and refined. My mother wanted to find me a son-in-law who would move into our home and take care of us. I had no objections. Every day, I happily looked through portraits of eligible bachelors with her, would pick out someone with a pleasant face, then arrange for me to meet him in private. Unfortunately, most of them made no effort to hide their shrewd calculations. Their eyes clearly said they were only interested in our family's wealth. After looking at countless candidates, none of them seemed right. My mother sighed, shaking her head. Any man with real talent and ambition wouldn't want to be a son-in-law living under his wife's roof. The ones sending their portraits are all the dregs no one else wants. I picked up one portrait with a look of disgust and showed it to her. Then this 40-year-old man is truly the bottom of the barrel. My mother agreed, crumpling the portrait into a ball and tossing it far away, but as it flew through the air, a familiar face caught my eye for a split second. He had delicate features and a meek expression. I stared at the crumpled paper for a long time. My mother came over to see what I was looking at. Him. His parents died when he was young, and his elder brother and sister-in-law treat him terribly. He has a good temperament, though. He's just a bit young, only 16. My mother didn't seem to approve of him. I pointed to the portrait firmly. "I'll choose him. I want to meet him." When the boy arrived, he looked even younger than his portrait suggested. He was thin and small, with a gaunt face. His large eyes were filled with timidity and a desperate need to please. Looking at him up close, he didn't really resemble that person after all. Only the shape of his eyes was a little similar. But Ling Yang would never have looked at me with such a subservient expression. No matter what the circumstances, I pushed a plate of pastries toward him. "Eat more, you're far too skinny." Before I knew it, my tone had taken on a maternal warmth. My mother was right, he was too young. I'd been curious to meet someone who looked a little like Ling Yang, but now I just felt sorry for this poor, mistreated boy. He ate in a refined, delicate manner. His eyes clearly showed his hunger, but he forced himself to eat slowly and politely in front of me. I rested my chin on my hand, watching him. He grew more and more rigid, as if sitting on pins and needles. My relaxed, leisurely demeanor was in stark contrast to his nervousness. I looked away, turning my gaze to the storyteller performing downstairs. For the past 6 months, one particular story had been extremely popular. It told the tale of a poor scholar who rose to fame after passing the imperial examinations, only to find that his wife had disappeared without a trace. He struggled to advance in his official career, constantly hampered by political rivals. While his secret search for his wife yielded no results, new chapters were added every day, and the storyteller always ended with the same suspenseful line, "Has the #1 scholar's wife been found today?" I listened to the story with great interest. It felt strangely familiar, like a distorted version of my own life with Ling Yang. The scholar in the story was a devoted husband. The real-life #1 scholar was also devoted. They just devoted themselves to different women. I sighed softly. The boy across from me froze mid-bite, silently putting down his pastry. I'm full. He must have misunderstood my sigh. I smiled at him reassuringly. It's all right. There's plenty more where that came from. He pressed his lips together, shaking his head, and pushed the plate of pastries toward me. The plate slid across the table with a loud clatter. His sleeve rode up, revealing a forearm covered in bruises. My eyebrows furrowed in concern. Dead parents, cruel brother and sister-in-law, a broken, beaten-down boy, Xia Sheng. I called his name. He looked up at me, his expression flustered and awkward. I hoped I'd remembered his name correctly. My embroidery shop is looking for an errand boy, I said gently. We'll provide room and board, and the monthly salary is quite good. Would you be interested in the position? If I'd told him directly that he wasn't suitable to be my husband, he would have been severely punished by his brother and sister-in-law when he returned home. But I couldn't just take him in as my son-in-law either. For one thing, his brother and sister-in-law were notoriously difficult to deal with. If I'd chosen Xia Sheng, we would have had to face their endless harassment and demands for money. This compromise was the best solution. I could help him escape his miserable situation without bringing trouble upon myself. Xia Sheng stared at me, his dim, lifeless eyes suddenly lighting up as if a flame had been ignited in them. Thank you so much, miss, he stammered, bowing his head in gratitude. The next day, he arrived at the embroidery shop. The manager arranged for his accommodation and meals, with a full belly and a warm bed to sleep in every night. Xia Sheng grew quickly, his features became more defined, and when he stood at the entrance of the shop, he even attracted quite a few young ladies to come inside and browse our wares. What a good investment. I also learned embroidery from the skilled craftswomen we'd hired, and soon became quite proficient. In my free time, I embroidered small, delicate patterns to give away as gifts to our customers. My mother continued to arrange matchmaking meetings for me, but year after year, none of the candidates seemed like the right fit. Instead, I started visiting the tea house more and more often. The tea house owner had taken a fancy to my mother, and now I could go there to listen to stories and meet potential suitors without paying a single cent. Another great deal. We lived a peaceful, happy life for 3 years. Then, another group of scholars returned home after the imperial examinations. Passing through our town on their journey, they stopped at the tea house to rest, and as they listened to the storyteller recounting the tale of the #1 scholar who'd spent 3 years searching for his missing wife, one of them suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "This story, it sounds exactly like Lord Ling." My hand froze mid-air, a melon seed between my fingers. Ever since Lord Ling was promoted to the Grand Secretariat, he's been searching everywhere for his first wife, another scholar added. Countless noble ladies have expressed their interest in marrying him, but he's turned them all down. I heard she was the wife who supported him through his days of poverty, loving him deeply and loyally. But right after he achieved success in the examinations, she vanished without a trace, loving him deeply and loyally. Since when? I know the inside story, a third scholar said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Before she married Lord Ling, she already had a lover, but since their families were of different social standings, the Su family, being an official family, would never have allowed their daughter to marry a commoner, so she was forced to marry Lord Ling instead. Then, while Lord Ling was away in the capital, her old lover found the chance to elope with her. What a load of nonsense. I couldn't help but let out a laugh. The scholars heard me and turned to look at me, their expressions polite and curious. Why are you laughing, young lady? I waved a hand dismissively. I also know a little something about the inside story. Actually, it was Lord Ling who already had someone else in his heart before he married his first wife. As soon as he topped the imperial examinations, He couldn't wait to send a marriage proposal to his true love. His wife, heartbroken and disillusioned, left him and traveled far away to start a new life. One of the scholars looked at me with an amused, disbelieving expression. Where did you hear that version of the story? Lord Ling never proposed to anyone else. On the contrary, right after he was named #1 scholar by the emperor himself, he immediately went to the Su family to discuss holding a grand, magnificent wedding for his wife. I froze, my mind going completely blank. Furthermore, the reason he's refused to remarry all these years is because he believes a man should never abandon the wife who stood by him through hard times. The scholar continued earnestly. He says he can't marry another woman when he doesn't even know if his first wife is alive or dead. Ling Yang never married Su Yuyan. After a moment of stunned silence, cold sweat broke out across my back. I stood up abruptly, ignoring the surprised stares of the scholars, and hurried home as fast as I could. Ling Yang looking for me was not a good thing. Not at all. The Su family had never given up on their dream of making him their son-in-law. If he openly came looking for me, with Su Ting's ruthless nature, once he found me, I would be as good as dead. My death would clear the way for Su Yuyan to take my place as Lord Ling's wife, allowing her to sit securely in her position. When Ling Yang had first become #1 scholar all those years ago, I'd briefly considered staying in the capital to be his wife, but as I'd waited for him to return home, I'd thought long and hard about it. Staying by his side wouldn't have been a life of ease and comfort. If I'd insisted on staying, my mother's safety would have been constantly at risk. The Su family would have seen me as a thorn in their side, and by then, my stepmother might not have been able to stop Su Ting from killing me. Furthermore, Ling Yang had just started his official career back then. With no political power or connections to speak of, he needed powerful allies to help him advance, which meant he would never have risked alienating the Su family for my sake. It was far more comfortable to take the money my stepmother had given me and disappear into the distance, starting a new life far away from all the trouble. Perhaps Ling Yang was now powerful enough to stand up to Su Ting and protect me, but there was no guarantee he would be the one to find me first, and there was also no guarantee he would choose me over Su Yuyan. I had no desire to gamble with my life, betting on how much he might or might not care about me. Damn these high-ranking officials and their endless schemes. Why did they have to drag an ordinary, innocent commoner like me into their mess? I had no intention of ever returning to that life of suffering and danger. I rushed home and started packing my bags in a panic. My maid, thinking I'd lost my mind, ran to fetch my mother. My mother looked at me in confusion, taking my hands in hers. "Shua, what are you doing? Are we going on a trip?" I bit my lip, squeezing her hands tightly in return. "It's not just me, Mother, it's we. We have to leave." I'd long since destroyed the 2 fake identity papers my stepmother had given me. I'd used silver to buy us new, legitimate identities, all to ensure the Su family would never be able to find us. But we'd lived here for too long now, leaving too many traces behind, especially my mother's embroidery. If her work ever made its way to the capital, it would be far too easy for someone from the Su family to recognize her unique style and track us down. My mother and I had to disappear again, hiding ourselves away from the world. After calming down a little, I put down my half-packed bags. Running away in a hurry would do us no good. Panic would only make us careless, leaving behind even more clues for them to follow. Neither Su Ting nor Ling Yang was a fool. Instead, perhaps we should try the strategy of placing ourselves in mortal danger to achieve survival. Spring was dry, prone to fires, but our mansion and embroidery shop were located in a densely populated area. Starting a fire there would inevitably harm innocent people. So what other plausible way was there to fake my death? For the next few days, I was completely distracted, my mind occupied with nothing but figuring out how to fake my own death. It would be far too suspicious for both mother and daughter to die suddenly. I needed to send my mother away first. As luck would have it, she'd been coughing a little lately. I used that as an excuse to claim she died of a sudden illness, holding an elaborate funeral for her that the entire county attended. Everyone watched as I dressed in mourning white, keeping vigil by her coffin for 7 full days. In reality, I'd already sent her to a quiet, picturesque mountain village far away, where she could hide safely. Then, claiming I couldn't bear to stay in this place of sorrow, I sold the embroidery shop. There was no shortage of people eager to buy it. I got a good price for it, and the deal included a promise that none of the seamstresses would lose their jobs. With the money from selling all my assets, I held a thick stack of silver notes, but I didn't deposit a single tael in any bank. This identity would have to be discarded sooner or later anyway. Just as I was about to climb into the carriage and leave, someone called out to me from behind, "Miss." I paused, holding on to the carriage door as I turned around. Xie Sheng stood there, his lips pressed together, as if he had something to say but couldn't find the words. He'd grown a lot over the past few years, his body developing in a way I'd never expected. The shopkeeper always joked that every bite of food he'd eaten had gone to good use. Now, Xie Sheng was tall and broad-shouldered. Standing next to him, I only reached his shoulders. He looked strong enough to knock a man out with one punch. Surely no one would dare bully him anymore, not even his brother and sister-in-law. The new owner of the shop promised me he wouldn't replace any of you, I said reassuringly. You can stay there and work in peace. He shook his head, the timidity he'd once shown completely gone, though he still looked nervous and awkward, a strange contrast to his imposing size. Miss, where do you plan to go after this? I'm going to visit my mother's hometown first, I lied. Then, Miss, can I come with you? I froze, caught off guard. It wasn't that I begrudged him the cost of traveling with me. After all, I was more than wealthy enough now. It was just. I looked into his hopeful eyes. I hesitated, my expression showing my dilemma. I was running for my life. Adding another person to the mix would only increase the risk. Besides, one could never be too careful. If he saw my mother alive and well after I'd held a funeral for her, how on earth would I explain that? As I fell silent, the light faded from Xie Sheng's face. The roads out of the county are dangerous, he said quietly. Let me escort you part of the way, at least. He'd understood my unspoken refusal. I couldn't bring myself to deny his final request, and that decision would save my life. We hadn't traveled more than a few dozen miles out of the county when we were ambushed by bandits, a young woman traveling alone, carrying a large sum of money. I must have been marked by them long ago. They'd come prepared. Even the armed escorts I'd hired couldn't hold them off. A bandit raised his massive blade, swinging it directly at my face. A shadow as big as a small hill fell over me. Xie Sheng pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly against his chest. I heard the sickening sound of steel slicing through flesh, followed by a muffled grunt of pain from the man shielding me. The air filled with the stench of blood. My hands trembled as I clung to Xie Sheng, my voice shaking. Xie Sheng. His body was rigid, shielding me completely, but he couldn't answer. He could only gasp for breath. Racked with pain, I pushed against his chest, screaming at the top of my lungs, "I'll give you all my money. Take whatever you want. Just stop hurting him." Despair washed over me. The bandits were bloodthirsty. They wanted both the money and our lives. Just then, a group of government officials surrounded us. The bandits, clearly unwilling to face off against the authorities, cursed loudly and fled into the mountains. I sank to the ground, holding Xie Sheng in my arms. His blood soaked through my clothes, staining them crimson. I was so terrified I'd lost all sense of myself, tears streaming down my face unchecked. "Please, officers, save him. Please save him." A carriage pulled up nearby. The driver lifted the curtain, and a tall, slender man stepped out. My vision was blurred with tears. I heard steady footsteps stop beside me, followed by a voice filled with concern. "We need to make suppressing these bandits a top priority. First, tend to the wounded man's bleeding." The officers nodded. Obeying his orders as they carefully lifted the unconscious Xie Sheng from my arms, a deep gash ran from his shoulder blade to his waist, the flesh torn and raw. I couldn't bear to look. I sat on the ground, my legs too weak to stand. A handkerchief appeared in front of me. "Are you injured, young lady?" I blinked away my tears, suddenly realizing how familiar that gentle voice sounded. I looked up, and my gaze fell on a face that looked somewhat pale and frail. I froze for a long moment, then quickly turned my head away, taking the handkerchief and dabbing at my tear-streaked face. "I'm fine, sir. There's no need to worry about me." "You're very lucky, miss," one of the officers said. "Our lord is on his way to take up his official post, and he just happened to pass by here. That's why we were able to save you." I lowered my eyes, murmuring my thanks. Mr. Li had passed the imperial examinations too. I stole a glance at him. He nodded slightly in my direction. It seemed he hadn't recognized me. I let out a quiet sigh of relief. These past few years of living in comfort had clearly changed me a great deal. "Where are you heading?" he asked kindly. "If our paths are the same, you're welcome to travel with us. It's far too dangerous for a young woman to be traveling alone." I looked at Xie Sheng, his face ashen with blood loss, and nodded my agreement. Li Mingsang assigned one of his officers to drive my carriage for me. When we reached the neighboring town, Li Mingsang went to report to the local government office. I took Xie Sheng to the medical clinic, then paid some beggars loitering in the corner to spread rumors that a young female merchant had been killed by bandits on the road. This town wasn't too far from the county where my embroidery shop was located. Sooner or later, the news would reach there. Once that was done, I returned to the clinic and collapsed onto the chair beside Xie Sheng's bed, exhausted. I fell asleep almost immediately. I'd never seen such a bloody scene before. The shock of the day had left me feeling nauseous, my temples throbbing with pain. When I woke up, my throat was parched and sore, my head felt like it was splitting apart, and every muscle in my body ached. I lay in bed as a female physician felt my pulse. "The young lady has developed a fever from shock and excessive worry," she said gently. "You must rest well." I thanked her and closed my eyes, wincing at the pain in my head. My suffering wasn't just physical, I also had to think about our future. Xie Sheng had taken a knife wound for me, and his life still hung in the balance. I couldn't just abandon him. Li Mingsang was now the magistrate of this town. For safety's sake, I couldn't stay here long either. I still needed to buy new identities for myself and my mother, then go find her. One problem after another swirled around in my muddled mind, eventually coalescing into a single resentful thought. "Ling Yang, why are you looking for me?" I slept fitfully in my illness, waking up in a cold sweat from constant nightmares. I dreamed of Ling Yang standing in the snowstorm, walking toward me step by step. Each step he took left a trail of blood-stained footprints in the snow. He held out his hand to me, his voice soft. "You Shu, I've finally found you." I jolted awake from the dream, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I pressed a hand to my heart, trying to calm myself down, but the image of Ling Yang's deep, intense gaze lingered in my mind. After a few moments, I slapped my cheeks lightly to clear my head. Just then, the female physician came in to tell me that Xie Sheng had woken up. I dragged my aching body out of bed to see him, feeling weak all over. He was lying on his stomach, his back wrapped in thick layers of bandages, faint traces of blood seeping through the cloth. His eyes locked onto mine the moment I walked in. "Miss, are you hurt? Why do you look so pale?" I sat down beside his bed, smiling weakly. "You almost died, and you're still worrying about whether my face looks pale or not." His already pale lips pressed into a thin line, his face filled with remorse. "I failed to protect you, miss. The doctor said it was only thanks to Xie Sheng's strong constitution that he'd survived. If that knife wound had been inflicted on anyone else, they would have either bled to death or died from infection and fever." I poured him a cup of warm water. I'd only given him a way out, a simple act of kindness on my part. I'd never imagined he would repay me with his life. You're not my employee anymore, I said quietly. My life is precious, but so is yours. He tightened his grip on the teacup. His voice so low I could barely hear it. My life is worth no more than a blade of grass. It's meaningless. My throat tightened, and I clenched the fabric of my skirt tightly in my hands. That's nonsense, I said firmly. Your life is as tough as a rock, unbreakable by wind or rain. I never want to hear you speak of yourself so lightly again. When you're trapped in a life of suffering, it's far too easy to give up on living if you lose the will to keep going. I looked down at Xie Sheng as he slowly sipped his water, his face pale and expression numb. For a moment, I saw the timid, frightened boy he'd once been. Xie Sheng, I said suddenly, I'm still looking for a bodyguard. You need to get well soon so you can protect me in the future. He froze mid-sip. Blinking in surprise, he looked up at me, his eyes wide and unblinking. Miss, I mean it, I said. From now on, you'll stay by my side. I didn't know if this moment of soft-heartedness would turn out to be the right decision or not, but for a split second, looking at him, I saw myself, the girl who'd struggled to survive in the Sioux mansion all those years ago, trapped in a never-ending cycle of darkness and pain, where waking up each day meant facing nothing but more suffering. A faint smile appeared on Xie Sheng's face. The doctor said his recovery was going remarkably well after that. My illness lingered, fading slowly day by day. But I grew stronger with each passing day. Li Mingsang visited us once at the clinic. As a newly appointed magistrate, he was swamped with work, so he only stayed for a short while before leaving. From the gossip I heard around town, Li Mingsang had actually been demoted to this position. But despite that, he'd thrown himself into his work these past few days, personally handling even the smallest disputes among the townspeople with great care and dedication. Once Xie Sheng was well enough to walk, I hired new armed escorts and we set off again. We traveled through 4 or 5 different towns, staying in each place for a short while to let Xie Sheng continue his recovery and to take care of the paperwork for our new identities before finally heading to find my mother. Although Xie Sheng seemed confused by our meandering route, he never asked any questions. 5 months passed before I saw my mother again. She was sitting in the courtyard, washing vegetables. I stood quietly at the courtyard gate, watching her. She didn't notice me at all. It was Xie Sheng, standing behind me, who made a sound, his voice stiff with shock. Miss, that looks like. I nodded at him, a faint smile on my lips. Yes, I told you I was going back to my hometown. Didn't I? He couldn't comprehend the idea of someone rising from the dead. He stood frozen in place, completely dumbfounded. My mother heard the noise, dropped the vegetables in her hands, and rushed toward me, her eyes filled with tears. Sure, my nose stung with emotion, and I opened my arms, about to throw myself into her embrace. Xie Sheng stepped in front of me, blocking my path, and stammered in panic, Miss, it's a ghost. Run. What a silly boy. There are no ghosts in broad daylight, I said, laughing through my tears. I stepped around him and hugged my mother tightly, relieved to feel that she hadn't lost any weight. I didn't explain the whole story of her fake death to Xie Sheng, only told him briefly that there had been good reasons for it. He didn't ask any more questions, but his expression grew much more serious and solemn after that. The place I'd chosen this time was quite remote, with few people around, but surprisingly, it was only a few days' journey away from the county where my embroidery shop had been. I'd only been able to find a temporary hiding place for my mother back then, which hadn't been safe in the long run. That was why I'd taken such a roundabout route to come back for her. Once I'd retrieved her, we set off again immediately. I refused to believe that after going through all this trouble, traveling so far away from the capital, they would still be able to find me. This journey had eaten into our savings considerably, but we still had more than enough money to live on. When we finally reached the Sichuan region, I opened a small shop selling ready-made clothes and bolts of cloth. The profits weren't nearly as high as those from the embroidery shop, but this quiet, simple life made me feel safe and at peace. I spent most of my time in the shop, where the customers were all women. Listening to their idle chatter and gossip was quite entertaining. Word spread that the imperial court had sent an imperial inspector to tour Jiangnan. It didn't take him long to wipe out the bandits plaguing the region. For a time, bandits everywhere went into hiding, lying low to avoid trouble. It was a great relief to everyone. The imperial inspector had already set off from Jiangnan, traveling westward. Law and order in Sichuan improved significantly as a result. Every morning and evening, Xie Sheng followed my mother and me, accompanying us on our daily trips between the shop and home. With his imposing build, the local hooligans didn't dare to lay a finger on us. There was only one downside to living here: the summers were unbearably hot. I wished I could lie on a block of ice all day long to cool down. Starting from mid-June, it began to rain. The sweltering heat dissipated somewhat, but the continuous downpour left everything damp and humid. The streets were empty of people. I closed the shop and stayed home with my mother, my mood growing increasingly irritable from the endless rain. The heavy rain showed no signs of letting up. A sense of unease settled over me. I sent Xie Sheng to the grain store to buy large quantities of rice and flour to stock up at home. Naturally, the grain store took advantage of the situation and raised its prices. In the evening, a clerk from the local government office knocked on our door, braving the rain in his straw raincoat. "Everyone out, a landslide has blocked the road," trapping the imperial inspector and his entourage. "All able-bodied men aged 16 and above are to report for duty immediately." Xie Sheng didn't come home that night. I grew anxious. As soon as dawn broke the next day, I told my mother where I was going and set off for the mountain pass to look for him. Mud splattered all over my dress as I walked. I found a wooden stick to use as a walking cane. Loose soil and rocks continued to tumble down from the mountainside above. The men working there were soaked to the bone, their clothes clinging to their bodies, their faces and hands caked in mud. The blocked mountain road was slowly being cleared, with workers digging away at the rocks from both sides. I searched back and forth several times, but there was no sign of Xie Sheng. I stopped a man, gesturing to describe Xie Sheng's height and build. "Sir, have you seen a tall, burly young man around here?" Just then, the road was finally cleared. A group of government officials walked over from the other side. Leading them were several young men dressed in bright red official robes. I glanced at them casually, then froze in place, my blood running cold. The man at the very front was tall and slender, his expression cold and aloof, as if sensing my gaze. His eyes swept over to me. Through the curtain of rain, a buzzing sound filled my ears. The imperial inspector was Ling Yang. He had seen me. Miss. The man I'd stopped was calling out to me, waving a hand in front of my face. I snapped back to my senses, quickly lowering my head to avoid Ling Yang's eyes. He didn't recognize me. Following the local magistrate's lead, he climbed into his carriage without a second glance. Not once did he look in my direction again after that first sweep of his eyes. With the road now clear, the local villagers began to disperse, rubbing their sore backs and shoulders as they left. The man I'd asked about Xie Sheng said to me, "Some of the stronger young men were sent to reinforce the dike. You might want to check the riverbank. Be careful, though the water is raging. You could easily get swept away if you're not careful." I nodded numbly, my mind in a daze, and changed direction to head for the river. Ling Yang had been searching for me all these years. I'd stood right in front of him, and he hadn't recognized me at all. I raised a hand to touch my face unconsciously, a strange, indescribable feeling welling up in my chest. I should have felt relieved, but for some reason, I didn't feel particularly happy. If I'd known he wouldn't recognize me, why had I gone to so much trouble to run and hide all these years? I pushed those chaotic thoughts aside, hurried home to grab some food, then made my way to the dike. The rain was still pouring down heavily, even with my umbrella. The hem of my dress was completely soaked through. When I reached the riverbank, I saw that what the man had told me was true. The river water was churning violently, so dangerous that even standing on the shore felt risky. I stood back at a safe distance, scanning the area. Sure enough, the group of officials I'd seen at the mountain pass earlier were now standing on a high platform overlooking the dike. My gaze swept over them briefly before I started searching for Xie Sheng's familiar figure. The strong young men working on the dike had thick hemp ropes tied around their waists, the other ends secured to stakes driven into the riverbank. They were piling sandbags onto the dike to reinforce it. "Hey, miss, don't stand there. It's dangerous, hurry back home," someone shouted at me. Most of the workers turned to look in my direction, under the weight of all those stares. I felt an immense pressure. It was Xie Sheng who spotted me first. Thanks to that shout, he waded through the shallow water toward me. "Miss, you shouldn't have come out in this weather," he said, his tone filled with concern. His arms were bare, covered in numerous small cuts and scrapes. I handed him the food I'd brought. "You didn't come home last night. I was worried about you. I didn't know if the government office was providing meals for you, so I brought you something to eat. Finish this before you go back to work." Xie Sheng took the food box from me, a smile spreading across his face. "They set up porridge stalls for us, and every one of us working here is getting 5 taels of silver as compensation." I frowned. "The work you're doing is so dangerous, you deserve every penny of that money." He raised a hand to wipe the water droplets from his face. I pulled out a handkerchief and offered it to him. "We don't need that 5 taels of silver at home," I said softly. "Reinforcing the dike is a good thing, but your safety is what matters most to me." He took the handkerchief, his eyes shining as he looked at me. "Miss still needs me. I promise I won't let anything happen to myself." I couldn't help but smile at his words. Just then, an official walked over from the platform to chase me away. "This isn't the place for idle chatter. Miss, hurry back home before the rain gets even heavier and you can't make it back." Xie Sheng nodded in agreement. "Yes, miss." "You should go back now." I nodded at him, opened my umbrella, and turned to leave. After walking a short distance, I glanced back at the platform. The officials were gathered there, discussing something in low voices. None of them were looking in my direction. It must have been my imagination. The local county records contained accounts of devastating floods in the past times when the river had burst its banks, submerging countless farmlands and villages, killing and injuring countless people. Hunger, disease, and death had followed, leading to large-scale plagues. The continuous heavy rain these past few days had weakened the dike, but the reinforcements were being made in time. Surely, we wouldn't see a repeat of those terrible disasters. That night, I was feeling restless as I helped my mother make steamed buns in the kitchen when someone knocked on our door. My mother looked up. "That must be Xie Sheng back from work. Go open the door for him." "Sure." I wiped my hands on my apron, walking over to the door and calling out as I unlatched it. "Why are you knocking? It's your own home." I lifted my head and froze, my heart skipping a beat as my eyes met a pair of deep, familiar ones. A man standing beside him said, "You're Yun Yang, right? The guest rooms at the government office got soaked through in the rain and are uninhabitable. We've arranged for the officials to stay with local families for the time being. This is Lord Ling." Under his intense gaze, I found it hard to speak. Lord Ling, clean out a room for Lord Ling at once," the man instructed sternly. "Make sure you don't neglect him in any way." His words took me by surprise. I blurted out without thinking, "I can't." Who had come up with this absurd idea of housing officials in ordinary people's homes? Were all the inns in town really full? TSK, such an ungrateful woman. The man scoffed. "Don't you realize this is an emergency?" Ling Yang hadn't said a single word since arriving, but his eyes had never left my face for a moment. Had he recognized me? I forced myself to calm down, turning to the official who'd spoken. "Lord Ling is a man of noble status. How can he possibly stay in such a humble abode?" It's not safe. Besides, there's the impropriety of a man staying in the home of two women. Word of this getting out would be most unbecoming. The official's face darkened, looking as if he thought I was being deliberately difficult and ungrateful. Ling Yang looked at me. His voice calm. I am not a man of noble status who shuns humble lodgings. I can sleep anywhere. I met his gaze. This residence is perfectly fine. He continued, it is by no means humble. I will take full responsibility for my own safety. You need not worry yourself on that account, young lady. He was answering each of my objections patiently, one by one. I never listen to idle gossip, nor do I care about it. I prefer to judge things based on what I see with my own eyes and what I know in my heart. As for the impropriety of a man staying with two women, there is another man living in this house besides you and your mother. Is there not? A man named Xia Sheng. You are not husband and wife, correct? The rain began to fall even harder. The official grew impatient, urging me, Yun Yang, stop wasting time and do as you're told. Do you have any other concerns, young lady? Ling Yang asked. His eyes fixed on me as if he could see straight through all my lies. After a brief pause, he spoke again, calling me by my assumed name, Yun Yang. My mother heard the commotion and came out of the kitchen. What's going on out here? Why have you been at the door for so long? The official explained. This lord will be staying with us for a few days. My mother was taken aback for a moment, then quickly stepped forward to pull me aside, gesturing for Ling Yang to come inside. While my mother went to clean out a guest room, I hung my head, pouring a cup of tea for Ling Yang. Suddenly, a handkerchief appeared in front of me. Ling Yang pointed to his own cheek. Flower. I felt my face grow hot with embarrassment. I raised a hand to wipe my cheek, but didn't take the handkerchief from him. He paused for a moment, then slowly withdrew his hand, putting the handkerchief away. Have you been well these past few years? He asked quietly. A chill ran down my spine. I looked up at him sharply. He took a sip of his tea, his fingers brushing lightly against the rim of the cup as he stared down at the liquid inside. A few years ago, Sichuan got a new governor, whose style of governance is quite different from his predecessors. Have you adapted well to the changes? Was he just making polite conversation about local governance? I let out a quiet breath of relief, nodding my head. How many characters can you read now? He asked. My heart skipped a beat again. My breath catching in my throat. Sichuan has been promoting education for women in recent years. He continued smoothly, as if just making idle conversation. I wonder how effective those efforts have been. They've been quite effective, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The tight knot in my chest loosened a little. Is it not tiring, traveling back and forth alone like this? He asked, his tone casual. My heart gave a violent jolt. He let out a low chuckle. I've heard that Yun Yang runs a fabric shop, traveling all over to negotiate with suppliers and compare prices. That's quite impressive for a young woman. Before I could fully catch my breath, he set down his teacup and looked up at me suddenly. His eyes piercing. What are you afraid of? Have you recognized me? I didn't get the chance to finish my question. Familiar footsteps sounded in the courtyard outside. Xia Sheng came in, soaking wet from head to toe. Miss, I'm home. He spotted Ling Yang sitting in the room and looked confused. I hurried over to pull him toward the door. This lord will be staying with us for a few days. I've already heated up some water. Go to your room, take a hot bath, and change into dry clothes. Don't catch a cold. Once Xia Sheng had gone into his room, I quickly began to think. Ling Yang had most likely recognized me. He was just toying with me, like a cat playing with a mouse, choosing not to expose me yet. I turned around under the eaves. Outside, the rain was falling in sheets, forming a curtain of water. Ling Yang had come outside at some point, standing in the doorway, his features hidden in the dim light. What is your relationship with him? He asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. I forced myself to stay calm, avoiding a direct answer. Lord Ling seems quite interested in my personal affairs. Is this also part of your inspection of the local people's lives? If he wasn't going to expose me, then I certainly wasn't going to give myself away.
Consciousness. I held the now cold bowl of medicine in my hands, staring at his pale, feverish face, my mind completely blank. Miss. The sound of Xie Sheng's voice jolted me out of my daze. I set the bowl down and turned around. Xie Sheng was holding a basin of cold water. The doctor said I should wipe Lord Ling's body with this to bring down his fever. Please, miss, would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I nodded numbly and left the room, closing the door behind me. The rain had finally stopped outside. Ling Yang lay in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness for 3 whole days. Whenever he woke up, he rambled incoherently, never fully lucid. I didn't go to see him, apart from the doctor. It was Xie Sheng who took care of him day and night. A steady stream of visitors came to check on his condition. I wasn't sure if Xie Sheng had overheard Ling Yang's delirious mutterings, but he grew increasingly quiet and withdrawn, acting strangely distant. Finally, he couldn't contain his curiosity any longer and asked me, Miss, the woman Lord Ling keeps calling for in his fever dreams, is that you? I looked at him. He hung his head, avoiding my gaze. All the other officials have already moved into the inn. Only Lord Ling chose to stay here. He keeps calling out a name Yushu. Your mother calls you Shua, Yushu and Shua. They're both you, aren't they? I fell silent for a long time, surprised by how sharp Xie Sheng's intuition was. Yes. I admitted quietly. Ling Yang and I were once married. Xie Sheng's head shot up, his eyes wide with shock. He was so stunned he couldn't speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was filled with confusion. Then, what did Lord Ling do to make you run away from him for all these years? Now that you've finally met again, what do you plan to do now, miss? I didn't have an answer for him. I really didn't know. Ling Yang's delirious words had touched a chord in my heart, but only a chord, nothing more. On the 4th day after he fell ill, Ling Yang finally regained full consciousness. The first thing he did was summon all the officials to discuss the post-flood reconstruction work. I waited until their meeting was over before entering his room. Ling Yang was leaning against the headboard, his face still pale and gaunt from his illness. I held out the bowl of medicine to him. He took it and drank it all in one go, his voice hoarse as he said, "Thank you for your care these past few days." Yun Yang. I froze, staring at him in surprise. What did you call me? He raised an eyebrow slightly, a faint, knowing glint in his eyes. Yun Yang. He didn't remember what he'd said while he was delirious. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. All the arguments and explanations I'd rehearsed in my mind suddenly vanished into thin air. I said nothing. Simply took the empty bowl from his hand and turned to leave, pretending that nothing had happened between us. Shortly after he recovered from his illness, Ling Yang was set to leave Sichuan. The officials from the Ministry of Works, sent by the Imperial Court, had already arrived in the region. The local government office held a farewell banquet in his honor. Ling Yang had been gone for half a day when a government official suddenly arrived at our house, summoning me to the banquet hall. He said Lord Ling had something important to discuss with me, but instead of leading me to the banquet, the official took me to a private room, grinning obsequiously. "You're a lucky woman, miss. When you climb the social ladder and become a noble lady, don't forget about us little people." With that, he closed the door and locked me inside. As night fell, Ling Yang was escorted into the room, supported by 2 of his attendants. He smelled faintly of wine, but his eyes were still clear and sharp. When he saw me standing there, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. He quickly recovered his composure, his expression turning cold as he snapped at his attendants. "Arrest the man who gave that order without my permission. I'll deal with him later." The attendants bowed and retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar. Ling Yang walked over to the table and poured himself a cup of tea. "I'd planned to stay at the inn tonight to avoid disturbing you and your mother so late at night," he said quietly. "I never expected them to bring you here. This is my fault." I stood up, maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. "Since there's nothing wrong, my lord, I'll take my leave now." As I passed him, he let out a long breath and said softly, "Would you be willing to listen to a story?" I paused in my tracks. He didn't wait for my answer before beginning to speak. "There once was a scholar who was born into a wealthy, influential family, blessed with a natural talent for learning. He grew arrogant and conceited, thinking that nothing in this world was beyond his grasp. He was engaged from a young age to a young lady who was also a talented poet and scholar. But then, disaster struck. His family fell from grace overnight. All the so-called friends who'd once fawned over him turned their backs. Some closed their doors to him, afraid of being implicated in his family's downfall. Others kicked him while he was down, mocking his misfortune. Even the looks the people who'd once admired him now gave him were filled with nothing but pity and contempt. And then, the bride his family sent to him was not the young lady he'd been engaged to. Instead, it was a plain, unfamiliar girl he'd never seen before. The scholar resented this new bride. Seeing her as just another symbol of his humiliation and disgrace, he treated her coldly, indifferently, something he would come to regret more than anything else in his life. Ling Yang thought he'd treated me badly. I thought back to our time together. It was true he'd never been particularly warm or affectionate. Most of the time, he'd been cold and detached, keeping me at arm's length. But he hadn't been that bad to me, either. But his wife treated him with nothing but kindness and devotion. She gave him everything she had. Holding nothing back, her love was so pure, so selfless, that it made the scholar jealous of anyone or anything that took even a little bit of her attention away from him. So he began to try to treat her better in return. He knew how much she wanted him to succeed in the imperial examinations, so he studied harder than he'd ever studied in his life. Looking back now, it's laughable how blind he was to his own feelings back then. The young lady he'd originally been engaged to came to find him, bringing him a beautifully embroidered sachet as a gift. The sachet looked perfect on the outside, but inside, the silk lining was frayed and tattered. He threw the sachet away, and in that moment, he finally understood his own heart. When he finally passed the imperial examinations and became the #1 scholar, he couldn't wait to return home. He wanted to hold a grand, magnificent wedding for his wife, a wedding worthy of her. He wanted to give her all the respect and dignity she deserved, to ensure she would never have to suffer hardship again for the rest of her life. But when he returned home in triumph, parading through the streets to the cheers of the crowd, his wife was gone, vanished without a trace, like a drop of water disappearing into the ocean. He fell silent for a long time. In that silence, I felt a suffocating weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The scholar wandered through life in a daze for a long time after that. He hired countless people to search for her, but there was no news, no trace of her anywhere. He realized then that if he had more power, more influence, he could search every corner of the empire for her. So he began to climb the ranks of the imperial court. But the higher he climbed, the more dangerous the path became. Every step forward was stained with blood. The emperor needed to promote new talents to balance the power of the old aristocratic families, and the newly minted #1 scholar was the perfect pawn for his plans. The imperial court was a den of vipers, full of hidden dangers and deadly intrigues. Then came word that his father had died while traveling on a business trip. His mother grieved day and night, her tears never drying. The scholar was exhausted, worn down by the endless political battles and the pain of his loss. He missed his wife more than ever. He kept telling himself that if she were by his side, he would have something to hold on to, something to comfort him in his darkest moments. He tracked down all the items from her dowry that she'd pawned to support him during his time of need. He spent years tracing the path of each item through every merchant and shop it had passed through, until he finally found the trail leading to her. But he still couldn't go to her, not yet. He knew that if he went to her openly, he would only put her life in danger, and deep down, he was afraid that she had left him of her own free will, that she no longer wanted anything to do with him. The young lady he'd originally been engaged to refused to give up on him. She even went so far as to ruin her own reputation, hoping to force him to marry her. But he sent her to a nunnery instead, cutting off all ties with her. Her father, who had turned a blind eye to her schemes, was arrested during a government crackdown on corruption and thrown into prison. It was during the interrogation of her father that the scholar finally learned the truth about all the hardships his wife had endured at the Su family's hands before she married him. The only thing that gave him comfort was discovering that she hadn't left him voluntarily. She'd been forced to flee, threatened with the lives of herself and her mother. Finally, the scholar found the courage to act. He begged the emperor to let him go on an inspection tour of the southern provinces, using the official mission as a cover to send more men to search for his wife. But he was too late. By the time his men arrived at the town where she'd been living, the embroidery shop she'd owned had already changed hands, and the former owner was said to have been killed by bandits while traveling. Ling Yang let out a ragged, shaky breath. As if struggling to control the overwhelming emotions threatening to consume him, it would be no exaggeration to say the scholar's heart was utterly broken. He continued, his voice thick with emotion, overwhelmed by agony. His only thought was to avenge his wife. He tried to vent the suffocating rage and grief building up inside him only to cough up a mouthful of blood. While he was making plans to wipe out the bandits, an old friend and colleague came to visit him. He told the scholar that the bandit threat was growing more urgent by the day, and in passing, mentioned that shortly after arriving in the region, the scholar had saved a young woman from danger. Ling Yang turned to look at me, a faint, bittersweet smile tugging at the corner of his lips. My colleague said there was something about that woman that felt strangely familiar. He drew a portrait of her, and that's when I realized, my wife wasn't dead, she was just very good at running away. Eliminating bandits was easy compared to finding her. Clues kept leading to dead ends, and I couldn't afford to linger in one place for too long. After suppressing the bandits, I had to continue my inspection tour. Along the way, I finally came to a painful realization. My wife was hiding from me on purpose. I was always one step behind her. I couldn't understand what I'd done wrong to make her hate me so much. Before I left for the imperial examinations, she'd promised she would wait for me. After all, I was on the verge of giving up all hope of ever finding her when I caught a glimpse of a young woman who looked just like her. Even though she'd changed so much over the years, I recognized her instantly from that one look. But the woman I'd spent years searching for, the moment she saw me, her first instinct was to lower her head and avoid my gaze. He'd known it was me from the very first second he saw me. I bowed my head, my voice barely audible. You don't have to finish the story, you didn't want to acknowledge me, and that wasn't the right time for a reunion anyway, he said, his tone growing colder, sharper. I was in a hurry to get to the riverbank to prevent the dike from bursting. But then, I saw you again, bringing food to another man, handing him a handkerchief. He spat out those last few words as if they tasted bitter in his mouth. People said you were just his employer and he was your servant. But I've never liked judging people based on what others say about them. I wanted to see how you two interacted with my own eyes, so I made up a flimsy excuse to stay in your house. I tested you, again and again, and in the end, I came to a conclusion. My wife had never loved me, not even for a single moment. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed hard. He lowered his eyes to meet mine. His gaze intense and filled with a raw, wounded pain. Was my judgment wrong? Wife, I remained silent for a long, long time. Ling Yang sighed softly, looking away. I'd made up my mind that I would never let you suffer another moment of hardship ever again, but I'd forgotten how smart and resilient you are. Given even a small patch of earth to grow, you will thrive, free and unshackled. To cage you by my side, to let anyone cage you, that would be the greatest injustice of all. After a long while, a bitter, humorless laugh sounded above my head. Pretend this was all just the ramblings of a drunk man. I won't ask any more questions. I'll have someone take you home. Yun Yang. I mumbled a quiet acknowledgement, not daring to look back at him. Ling Yang stood behind me, his voice softening, almost gentle. From now on, you can finally rest easy. No one will ever dare to harm you again. You don't have to run or hide anymore. You can do whatever you want. Live however you want. I paused mid-step, then kept walking toward the door. His gaze lingered on my back, heavy and warm, like a caress. I took a deep breath and turned around to face him, my voice steady and clear. The person that lady was hiding from was never the scholar. It was the only answer I could give him. Ling Yang was a good official, an honest, capable man who did his duty by the people. The imperial court needed men like him, and I was like a weed, tough, resilient. meant to grow wild and free under the open sky. That was what was best for me. It was an unspoken understanding between us. 5 days later, the imperial inspector departed from Sichuan. The townspeople lined the streets, waving and cheering to bid him farewell. I stood in the crowd, watching his carriage disappear into the distance, lost in thought. There was one thing I never told him. Once, a long time ago, on a cold, snowy day, there was a man who walked beside me, sharing his umbrella with me, helping me through the snow. For a brief, fleeting moment, he had made my heart flutter.